Another baby, a toddler. Yeah, Freedom Food Farm. We've been here. We moved to here in 2014. We do about 3 or 4 acres of vegetables. Raise beef and lamb for meat. Also chickens for meat and eggs, and pigs for pork. We do like 3 or 4 acres of vegetables. About an acre of that is on a no-till hand scale market garden, and then 3 or 4 acres is more mechanized tractor, like reduced till and no-till mixes. And we also have some greenhouses, so we do winter greens, and we sell our products through we have a farm store in there behind the door, and then we also do a farmer's market. And so yeah, one of our main goals on the farm is we're really trying to develop ways to keep feeding people throughout the climate crisis, and also making sure everybody is fed and not just those who can typically afford healthy, nutritious food. So a big part of that recently is trying to figure out how to grow no-till, not only on a smaller scale, but also kind of on a larger scale. My goal is to get more of the larger scale organic farms to adopt practices. They really love their tractors. It's really hard to convince them to get off the tractor and pick up a hoe or a broad fork or something. So I'm hoping if we can figure out some sort of more mechanized systems, more no-till can be adapted by the larger scale organic farms. And we'll talk more about that later. But thank you everyone for coming.
Hi everyone, I'm Maggie Payne. I work with the USDA, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, and so I'm here I'm a soil scientist with them, and so I'm here to talk about the soils aspect of things and answer anybody's questions on any of the practices that are going on or any of the soil health practices that we're doing here.
So I'll just briefly kind of describe how we're using this equipment in our rotation and what's here. So this field here it was cover crops and pasture for 2 or 3 years, and then we used pigs to do the bulk of the tillage, and then we did some tillage with a light disc harrow on a tractor, and then we made raised beds using a black plastic layer, like a regular rain flow layer, and put regular black plastic down. So that's all pretty conventional vegetable operations. And then we grew sweet potatoes here, and then once we harvest the sweet potatoes, you're pretty much have to mix up the soil anyway to get the sweet potatoes out. So I feel like that's like a perfect time to plant something else, because technically it's no-till, because you haven't run a tillage implement through there, but you've also kind of stirred up the soil just by harvesting the sweet potatoes. So after the sweet potatoes are out, we use a no-till drill to seed the cover crop, so that we can just drive right over the bed. We put down oats, peas, and winter radish here. We go about 150 to 200 pounds to the acre. It took a little bit of getting used to with the no-till to getting the germination okay, because the raised part of the bed and then the aisles. So we just played around with the adjustments. We feel like we got it pretty good now. We feel like this is a good way too to reuse these beds next year, because all the sweet potato tops the vines that we pulled off to the side, and actually even before we harvested the sweet potatoes, we were using mulch in between the black plastic beds. So there's already layer mulch, and then we added the sweet potato vines as additional mulch. So now our pathways are fairly well mulched. We're not gonna have too much weed trouble in there, hopefully. And then this fall, we plant our garlic directly into the beds once the cover crop's already been planted. So we harvest sweet potatoes, we spread compost over the top, and then no-till drill the cover crop, and then we're using a water wheel transplanter to just stick the cloves of garlic in between the rows of the cover crop. And so really we've only planted one bed of garlic so far. It's that one just before the sweet potatoes, the last bed of sweet potatoes. So if you look closely, you can kind of see the soil's disturbed a little bit where we planted the garlic bulbs. And then afterwards, we'll be able to go on and spread mulch over this. Today we're going to spread this green chop, which is the new equipment we got, and then also we'll spread leaves on after that. So we have a compost spreader that we bought that fits exactly the bed size, 72 inches. So it took a little research to find a compost spreader that was going to fit down. But we're thinking we could spread leaves with it, we could spread green mulch with it, and we could also spread the compost. And so we're kind of trying to build like more of a natural ecosystem in the bed. So where you have dirt on the bottom, or soil, sorry, I shouldn't say dirt, that's a bad word for farmers, soil on the bottom, and then we're spreading compost over that. So that's like the degraded organic matter. It's not quite soil yet, but it's, you know, it's not green. And then on top of the compost, we're spreading green chop, and so that's, you know, material that's been alive more recently. There's a lot of nitrogen in it, and that can feed all the microbes that are living in the compost and the soil underneath it. And so we're hoping that, you know, we just got this equipment literally Friday, the last piece of equipment. So I just tried it out for the first time today. Hopefully we don't have any more troubles. But Sarah?
Okay, I have two questions.
Yeah.
Is your no-till drill bed width?
Yeah, we got one 6 feet on center, so that and a 3-point hitch, so it's really easy to just do one bed at a time.
How much was it?
It was 18,000, and we got a grant through MDAR, the Acre Grant, Agricultural Climate Resiliency and Excellence, and they paid for 75% of it. Yeah.
And then, do you make your own compost or do you source it?
Both. So we try to make as much as we can, and then we do buy some from Casella, which they have a place in Johnston. But we're really not happy with the quality of compost that's available commercially. So you know, we want to create as much of our own nutrients on site as we can, and also we want high quality compost. So we're really trying to get more compost here.
Ours is like a weed seed petri dish that was super compost.
Oh no, yeah.
Members used to drop things off. And...
Yeah, we make sure to heat it up. We have a compost turner, and so we're running it through like every day or two.
What is it?
Turner, so it's like a rototiller for your compost pile, and so yeah, we get that temperature really going up high and cook it for like 15 days or so, and that'll get rid of most of the weed seeds.
Like just treat it with a bucket and like being like, oh, it's ready. I don't think really.
Yeah, we used to do it with the bucket, and you can do it, but it's a lot more difficult. And you definitely get a compost thermometer. It's like your best friend is that compost thermometer, checking it and then just turning it like every day or two, and making sure you have the right mixture of nitrogen and carbon.
Okay, that's cool. Thank you.
No problem. So yeah, the idea with that green chop, putting that on the top, is as that's broken down by the microbes in the compost and the soil, it's releasing more nutrients. So you're also adding fertility to the crop with that mulch, and you're protecting the soil from raindrops, you're protecting the soil from wind, you're keeping moisture in the soil, and yeah, there's just a lot of benefits to having that green mulch on top. So
Can I ask one more question?
yeah.
When you had the plastic mulch in the suitcase, what was the mulch in the past? Like wood chips or?
We use a mixture of leaves and straw.
From on site?
Yeah, leaves we got dropped off by landscapers, and then straw we have some fields we cut for straw and mulch and whatnot. But ideally, we'd like to use the green chop because it's just easier to do than making straw bales and drying them out and handling them. We can just spread the green chop over the black plastic and then use a push broom to just push it off into the in between the rows. We were doing the same thing with the leaves, but we were having trouble consistently getting good leaves that weren't full of like bricks and all sorts of things. So, you know, leaves are great if you can get them clean and in good shape. So
you actually put the green chop on top of the bed and then before it's planted and then put that into the bed.
yeah, so well, the garlic, we're planting the garlic first and then spreading the green chop over it. But with other crops, we're going to be trying this with things like winter squash. So like this field over here, we have a roller, a cover crop roller as well. So we're going to roll. Actually, so we had a summer crop that we grew. We rolled that for a first base layer of mulch, and then we no-till drilled in some triticale over that, and then that's going to grow up, and we're going to roll that in the spring because we tried it before with just one overwintered crop and rolling it, and it wasn't enough coverage. So we're thinking if we have a summer crop that's rolled and then a winter crop no-tilled into that and rolled, we're going to have even more mulch, and then we can plant winter squash into that. But afterwards, if there's patches where we need more mulch or we want to add some of that green chop, we can put that on over the rolled part and then plant winter squash into that. And we're also thinking like in the market garden, either before or after we plant things like kale and chard and some crops like that, tomatoes, we can take the green chop and throw it in there with wheelbarrows or by hand. Yeah, we haven't gotten that far yet, but we're hoping to figure out the best way to do that. And we're thinking that you can, pretty much just spread the green chop over the bed and then plant into it with a water wheel transplanter. We haven't tried it yet, but I don't see why it would be too much of a problem as long as the mulch isn't too thick. So.
When you talk about, we did that 3 or 4 acres of stuff this year.
Oh right, yeah, because you guys have the flail mower where it catches it all in the back, right, and then dumps it out, yeah. And that's been working out pretty well.
Overall, yeah, there's a lot of glitches that I can talk to you about.
Right on, yeah. Yeah, we haven't had it long enough to hit the glitches yet, so we'll be getting them. But yeah, if anyone had any other questions before, I can just run down to the other side of the field. I'm going to get in the orange tractor and drive down and mow this. We left one bed of sorghum Sudan up. We're really thinking too is this is a nice system to mix in when you're growing a lot of cover crops, because the sorghum Sudan is just so much biomass. And if you cut everything from the top and you use it for mulch, yeah, you're taking a lot of the organic matter out of the cover crop system, but you got to remember there's still 50% of that organic matter is below ground, so you're really only taking 50% of the organic matter that cover crop's made and taking it off, and then you're putting it in another system. So we're hoping that works out and that it kind of fits into a system where you have lots of cover crops to make use of, and because a lot of people have to get rid of the cover crops anyway, so it'd be nice to be able to use it for mulch later on.
The cover that you have growing here, when was this planted?
This was planted, these first 5 beds, I think we planted first week of September, and then the second 5 was either second or third week of September. So yeah, we did find there's like a right window of getting it planted in time. Like, we would like to have more soil coverage, but if it gets much taller than this, it gets hard to plant the garlic into. Whereas before we seeded it like end of August, and some of the clover and the oats rather had fallen over already, so we're having a hard time getting the garlic through the cover crop. So it's also, we harvest our sweet potatoes late this year. So,
yeah. And when you put the green chop on, is that going to smother this cover crop then?
Yeah, so the green chop probably will smother it. So typically, if we're going to do this system, we would have spread the green chop first and then no-tilled over the green chop. But yeah, just for display purposes, we're going to just spread the green chop over the top.
Okay.
And I'm hoping too that it might be thin enough that it doesn't totally smother out the crop. But yeah, we'll find out. Yeah, any other questions before I run and do the demo real quick? All right.
Where do you want us to sort of congregate?
So we're going to be coming down on the other side here. So maybe just like 50 feet that way, you'll see me coming down here. And then I'll probably just make another pass up to the other tractor. And I already loaded the manure spreader from the forage just to kind of cut out a step. But basically, we're mowing it with that tractor, blowing it into the big red wagon, and then the red wagon unloads it out the back and puts it into the manure spreader. And then the manure spreader goes down the bed. So it'll be hopefully more clear once I do it. Yeah, definitely gonna need a lot more, huh? It's the thickest it would. Also, yeah, it seems like you probably need at least 2 manure spreader loads to get a decent coverage of mulch on each bed. The other thing we've thought about and is on our list is to try to adjust these paddles, because right now the way a manure spreader works is these paddles are meant to throw things off to the side so you get a wider coverage. And one of our winter projects is to weld some different brackets on there and flip them, so instead of throwing it to the outside, throw it to the inside. Possibly, yeah, some shields, I've seen that done. So the guy who I got the idea from, Jan Henrik Kropp, he was doing it in Germany, and he built some shields that went right here, and so he was mulching after planting. So there's like a little metal shield down here that went over the plants as it went down, so the mulch would come off and go to either side of the shield and protect the plants. We're thinking we're better off spraying the mulch first than trying to plant into it. So yeah, and then yeah, like I was saying, if this, ideally we're not putting it onto a crop already, like a cover crop or something. We just did this for demonstration, but we're thinking like in some of these beds over here, for instance, they're winter kill oats and peas, so they'll die over the winter, and then in the spring there'll be some coverage with dead oats and peas, but there's not enough to keep the weeds out. So that's when we like to go cut a whole bunch of green chop, spread probably 2 or 3 loads on each bed, and try to get at least an inch or 2 of mulch on there, and then plant onions straight into that in the spring. So that was like one of the things we'd be using this for. And yeah, I'll have hopefully a lot more information in a couple of years. It's the thing with farming, it really takes a whole year to like figure one thing out, because you got to wait another year before you try it. If it doesn't work, you got right, exactly, yeah. We've really been finding, yeah, like the big thing too, yeah, with the no-till is somehow you got to get the weeds under control first. And I mean, it's impossible to get them totally under control, but the fields that we had not many weed problems work a lot better. So it's somehow you got to get that seed bank lower before you try to start systems. But yeah, we've still had weed trouble for sure with things like that. Like this year we did that same thing with the onions, where we had the oats and peas winter kill, and then we just planted right into them our onion crop without any mulch. And yeah, we had weed pressure, but we did notice though, the beds that we had seeded the oats and peas earlier, like in late August, that had like a total coverage of oats and peas, even though there was still gaps, there's almost the same amount of bare soil in the spring. Like as far as when you look down at the soil, you could see parts of the soil, but places where it had more biomass in the fall, we had way less weeds germinating, even though there's the same amount that was exposed to the sun. So it seems like that's a key to it, but yeah, I think there's a lot to it to try to figure out.
You've been doing tarping for weed control?
In the market garden we have, and then we're trying to keep the labor down on the tractor powered stuff, and so we just haven't had the labor to come and try to do it. Because yeah, I was thinking that would work perfect if we had the winter killed oats and peas, or even we could have done an overwintered crop and then mowed it or knocked it down and tarped it, but we just never have enough hands to come out and tarp it in April.
Tomatoes and stuff are in your market garden?
Greenhouse mostly. So all the summer crops are in the greenhouse, and we're getting one greenhouse is the same as like an acre of tomatoes or whatever, so that cuts down our footprint. And then yeah, the market garden, be able to reuse beds and just being more efficient and getting higher yields is reducing the amount we need to use. And then this system hopefully is going to work really well with our overall farming strategy too, because since we have a lot of ruminants, we have a lot of pasture, and especially in May and June we have more pasture than we can use. It's growing so fast at that point that we can't rotate the animals around on it fast enough, so we just have all this extra pasture land that we need to cut it, or it's going to get mature and then it's not as good for the animals later on. We do try to hay as much as we can for the animals, but some years, like this year, it was really difficult to hay in May and June. We didn't get much good weather, and so with the forage chopper, we can go out, even if it's going to rain the next day, we can still go out and cut a bunch and use it. So yeah, it will depend on your system. If you only have 2 acres or so and you're farming 1 acre with vegetables, it's probably not going to work as well. But if you have access to other non-vegetable land, then I think it's going to work out. And so yeah, we're trying to add more and more resources to that smaller acreage for the vegetables, and we're taking a small amount of fertility off from the other fields out there, bringing it into the vegetables, but hopefully we're putting some of that fertility back with the use of the animals and legumes and nitrogen fixing things in the pasture. So hopefully it'll work out in this system.
So what do you think your ratio is of planted land versus like the land that you have just in the cover crops where you're harvesting the cover crops or the hay land?
There's about 40 acres that's pasture and hay, and then we're doing 3 or 4 acres of vegetables. And then there's probably another 3 or 4 acres of cover crops each year. So yeah, we have pretty luxurious ratio there. I don't think it would have to be quite that much, but because a lot of that 30 or 40 acres we're using for the ruminants and for cutting hay for them for the winter. So, but I think that sounds about right what Dave was saying. If you had 3 or 4 acres of cover crop, that would probably mulch your 1 acre of market garden. So, if you had a 5 acre field, you might be better off, you have 1 acre of vegetables and just the other 4 acres are rotating cover crops or pasture, and you're using those, gathering resources off of there and using it on your market garden. We're really hoping this is going to reduce the amount of fertility we'd have to pull in as well, because that's almost half the reason I'm interested in this mulching is the being able to get fertility onto the crops and also a more steady supply of nutrients throughout the growing season. Instead of putting on your fertilizer before you plant, the green chop is something that's going to be adding nutrients as the plants are growing, and the nutrient needs of crops really peak towards the end of them. So your long season crops that take 90 or 120 days, that's when you need that nutrients at 90 or 120 days. And so by then, a lot of times the fertility you put in pre-planting is leached out. So
Especially a year like this when it rains and rains and rains.
yeah,
Whatever you thought you had put on there at the beginning of the year is gone in August.
yeah.
So you're either side dressing or you're out.
Yeah, we found that with like our winter squash. It was by August we're starting to get a little yellow leaves just because there's so much rain. So we're thinking if we'd have been able to mulch it with a green chop, maybe like at that point the green chop would be putting in a fair bit of nutrients and keep those yellow leaves away. And it also holds in moisture and protects the soil.
Would you have been able to drive over this squash in August with this?
So we put it on before planting. Yeah, so we spread it out. Yeah, exactly. And then another tool we're planning on using in this system is we got as part of the grant as well, a no-till attachment for our water wheel. That's basically just 2 discs that go down the middle of the bed and like just kind of cut. It's like a strip till kind of just cuts a little slit into the soil, and then we can put the water wheel on behind that, and it gives you just like more seed to or root to soil contact when we're transplanting. Because we had tried. Yeah, we can take a look at that on the way back. Yeah, we didn't end up using it this. We got it at the end of last year, and then we weren't able to use it this year, but next year. They don't have a 2-row system yet. They said they're working on it. It's just a 1-row thing.
Because that's another advantage of doing this heavy mulch and planting into it, and this is your weed control, which we're also pushing the envelope on. You got better fertility. You don't have to worry about mechanical weed control. We're doing a lot of, we're planting a lot heavier.
Yeah.
So, we're planting a lot of stuff like we'll do 2 rows, do a lot of stuff in 5 rows. We'll do 2 rows in kale, 3 rows in head lettuce.
Oh,
The
nice.
head lettuce will come out in 4 weeks. By the time the kale is starting to chart, the kale is starting to shade that head lettuce a little bit too much, we'll pull that head lettuce out. The kale will be there another couple months.
Nice.
So we're farming more and more intensively. Sort of the thing that people routinely do on hand scale market garden thing. We're figuring out ways to do that on a couple acre scale. Tractor operated. Yeah. It's in a heavy mulch, so we don't have to worry about any cultivation. So
But the biggest challenge of that brings in the modification of the water wheel transplanter because you're trying to do all of those
yeah,
rows in the
so
water wheel.
we're trying to figure out how to do no-till with the water well and 5 9-inch rows, which sort of works, but it's better.
And you're just planting right through the mulch with the water wheel?
Yeah, we modified our spikes on the water wheel so they're about this long and have
Okay.
a sharp end on them. So they sort of poke a hole through the mulch,
Okay.
but it takes almost twice as long to transplant because you gotta sort of pokes a hole through, but you gotta open it up a little bit more by hand. So.
And that's with about 4 or 5 inches of mulch? Or?
We're 3 to 4.
Okay.
That's not enough.
It hasn't been enough?
No. For
Okay.
something like kale, that's shorter season, it's maybe just barely enough. But for anything like tomatoes and peppers and eggplant, it's full season, it's not enough.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what we're hoping to use this in conjunction with like the rolling those other crops so that we kind of have like a base layer of mulch built up by rolling crops and then maybe put in some additional on like the long season.
That for a while?
We tried it the last, I think, 3 years rolling, and so far, yeah, it wasn't, the first time we did it, it wasn't enough mulch.
Are you getting a good kill? Because that's the thing that, all of our early crops, tomatoes and especially like the first planting of tomatoes and a lot of stuff that you're planting, early to mid-May, you roll that stuff and it won't kill it.
Yeah, so the time, so we only have done winter squash with it so far.
Yeah.
And so
anything you're planting,
right, yeah,
the 1st and maybe the 10th of June, you're fine. But anything you're planting in May, you can't roll it and kill it.
Yeah.
A lot of our stuff goes in.
So what happened the second time? You said the first time you didn't get enough mulch. What did you do differently the second time you get more?
I think the second time, well, trying to think. I think the second time, I think I did the same thing. So we rolled it and then planted into it, and it wasn't enough, and so we ended up just mowing that, planting cover crop into it again the following year, and then rolling that, and that seemed like it was almost enough. But that time we didn't have enough winter squash plants to try it, and also we were waiting on the no-till attachment that didn't come, and last time it didn't plant very well without the no-till attachment, so we didn't want to risk it. So, but one thing I was thinking about for that, David, though, the early crops is we're wondering if sorghum Sudan, if you either let it stand up in winter kill and then roll it in the spring and plant like tomatoes and things into it, or roll it in I was even thinking if you rolled it in late August or September and then put in oats and peas, no-till drilled, then you get another layer that would winter kill, and then maybe that would be enough, or at least it would give you like an inch or two start, and then you can put an inch or two of this on.
I'll let you know how it works, but we had a couple blocks where we did exactly that. We feel after garlic, so it was open in August. We hauled in, we spread a good, not as much, I ran out of mulch, but planted a good 3 to 4 inches, or spread a good 3 to 4 inches of mulch, and then no-tilled oats and peas into that, so that'll grow up and die. So hopefully that's sort of pre-mulched for spring.
Nice.
Hopefully.
Right on.
Would you try to roll oats and peas, or would you just mow that?
Just let them winter kill, and
Oh,
then.
I thought you were talking about the spring you're going to plant this.
Yeah, no, I was thinking grow the summer crop for that, and then do oats and peas that fall as like another, just to get a little bit more. It's hard to say whether you'd even get more coverage or.
Roll the sorghum just so it's down so you could plant the oats and peas into it.
Right. Yeah. And we did. So this is rolled oats, the sorghum Sudan, the stuff that's kind of down. I only rolled it once. It didn't totally kill it. I probably should have rolled it twice. And then we put in triticale and wheat and some other ones that we can hopefully roll in the spring. So that'll be like 2 years of growing and rolling stuff, and then we're gonna, now that we have the no-till attachment and we can all plan for it, we're gonna put it in the spring, the winter squash, and see if that's enough.
Feel about instead of rolling some of that, just flail mowing it in place.
Yeah, I was thought about that, and I'll probably do that more often now that we can harvest it and use it for something. But I was always nervous that it'd chop it up so fine that it'd break down a lot faster and not be there for the long term.
I'm curious. The length of this stuff. I think it's hard to tell with this grass, but I think this chops it finer than what our flail mower does.
Huh.
We have longer pieces.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I haven't messed with the adjustments either. I don't know if you can cut it into longer pieces or not, or what.
But that's, yeah, you want big chunks so it breaks down slower.
Yeah. Yeah.
You may want to show folks the roller first.
Oh yeah, yeah. So you want, we walk by through the market garden. We can look at some soil and point out the equipment to anyone.
What soil type do you have here?
This is a loamy sand.
It's a loamy sand.
Yeah, so it's super sandy. It's like beach sand almost.
Maybe you've just built up your organic matter better than we have. We gave up on trying any kind of a raised bed because they just collapsed on us.
Yeah, do you mind if I dig a little?
Yeah, go right ahead. Or actually, you want to do that? We got garlic in that one if you want to just do that. Yeah, this was like a beach when we first moved here, and it's gotten darker as we keep spreading more and doing a lot more cover crops. But yeah, it's
You
pretty
don't have
sandy.
garlic in this one?
No.
Okay,
no.
sorry.
What's your soil organic matter in the field right now?
Last we checked, it was around 3%.
Yeah,
So 2.9, I think maybe.
If you want to see what the texture is, we do have pretty sandy soils down here. But yeah, that's nice and friable. Do you get any compaction problems? Have you had any compaction problems in your soils?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Subsoiling?
No,
We've had the subsoil.
really.
What is you said your textures are like sandy loams?
Loamy sand.
Oh, you're loamy sand too? Yeah. So you're getting compaction.
Yeah. Well, we
Issues.
started out with tremendous compaction when we came there 15 years ago.
Yeah.
And so do you continually subsoil, or is
We
it?
did a lot early on, and now I try to subsoil every field at least once a year, but I don't always get them in sort of maintenance.
Yeah. Yeah, because sometimes if you can do that one time and then get those roots to go down there
Yeah.
to break it up, that'll help out. But sometimes it continues to come back depending on how much traffic and things like that are going over it.
That's another thing I was wondering about compaction. So you end up driving on your beds with that.
No, we just use that to spread it onto the manure spreader.
So would you ever harvest off of a field like this, or are you only harvesting out in the...
We might, yeah, but yeah, I guess we try to only if we'd be able to line it up so that we're not driving on the beds.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm not sure if I'll be able to set it up like that or not. Well, I definitely won't now that I think about it, because that forage wagon's too wide. They didn't have a wagon that would fit down the beds. So. Yeah, that's the smallest one they sell. So. Yeah. Yeah, and the dealer even was like, "What? Like I haven't sold one that small in 20 years."
We started going and looking in junkyards in the Midwest, you know.
Yeah, yeah. There's
wagons we had when I was a kid on rural Midwest farms in the 70s. There was a lot smaller ones than that, but you
Yeah.
don't make them anymore.
yeah, but there's millions of them in hedgerows across New England. Just
If we were to pad a pocket, that's what we would have been looking for, but
yeah,
because it was a gram, we had to buy one.
They might need a little work, but they're...
yeah. You better know how to work on them a little bit, but.
This is your first year in permanent beds with this, right?
This is in this field, yeah. So this was cover crops for 3 years and pasture up until this year. We tilled it with pigs and a disc harrow and planted sweet potatoes. And then the other sometimes too, after we plant the garlic, after we harvest this, we'll pull the garlic out and we'll usually plant our fall brassicas into that same bed. And try to get another crop out of the same beds without tilling them again. And that's another place where we really hoping that the mulch will work. So after harvesting the garlic and onions, we could spread a layer of compost, spread a layer of mulch, and then plant our fall brassicas into that. So it'd be 3 crops over 2 years with just one tillage event, and then another 3 years of cover crops. So it's really one tillage event every 6 years or so, but you're getting 3 crops out of it. If it works. So
So are you doing mulching in this garden at all?
Not as much because we're hoping to more now that we have that new
With
system.
the chopper, yeah.
But yeah, we haven't been doing a lot of mulching here. Just once in a while with straw mulch.
So what's your main weed control for this garden?
Tarping and then just some hand weeding.
Yeah.
We have the bed set up so we can use the G with a basket weeder. So when we first set up the market garden, like we were using that a lot more, but as we haven't tilled it all except for just some broad forking and things, so the weed pressure has gone way down. So we're like some of the beds, like this salad mix, we just plant it and we don't really have to weed it at all. It just
That's great.
Finally got ahead on it.
yeah, it took like, each year it got better, but it was like the third year finally it was like, okay, you can plant stuff and not have to worry about it as much.
Were you saying you use broad fork here?
Yeah, so this is all, technically, or no till. There's such a wide range, but we try to do as minimal tillage as possible. So if it's really compacted or something, we might broad fork it, but normally like things like carrots or lettuce, we just harvest it off. If it's head lettuce, we might just plant right back into it. If it's something like the salad mix, then we have to tarp it for like a few weeks to get that to break down and then just plant into that. And then we also usually spread some compost on top in between. So.
What do you do in the greenhouses?
Yeah, greenhouses are the same operation, pretty much. Yeah. Yeah, and we're thinking even just more crop diversity in general in here, because it has been, this is I think the 4th year here, and so far everything's working out great. But for anyone who's farmed vegetables for a long period of time, a lot of times like things are great for the first few years, and then like your pests build up and like all your issues that they weren't initially an issue, they kind of compound some of them over time. And so we're kind of leaning towards, we originally started with about this half section. So this section's been in 4 years. That section over there has only come in the last year or two. We've converted it from cover crop into the market garden. And so we'll probably eventually just move everything to that half, grow there for 2 years while we cover crop this half, and probably still rotate it. It's probably still a good idea to have some sort of rotation with non-vegetable and deeper rooted or even longer term stuff like perennial cover crop for 2 years would probably be a really good idea.
Did you say you do winter covers in here at all?
We've just been doing winter kills so that we don't, so it's so hard to deal with the stuff that lives over the winter.
Yeah.
We have to either weed whack it and then tarp it or like roll it by hand or something. So we've just been doing like oats and peas and tillage radish for winter cover crops.
Yeah.
But yeah, we'd like to figure out better ways to manage the overwintered stuff. Because there's a lot more benefits to that, I think. And also, like this time of year, we don't want to be planting oats and peas once we harvest this because there's not really enough window for it to grow. So like Austrian winter peas and triticale would be that's what we found grows the best over winter in our soil, Austrian winter peas and triticale. So if we could plant that this time of year, it would be, by next June, it would be this tall or so. But then we'd have to deal with all that biomass somehow by hand. So got to kind of try to pick and choose your battles.
What's your tarping weed control program? Because it really looks good out here.
We generally just, like after a section is harvested, like say these 3 beds, we finish harvesting the lettuce and the spinach, we'll usually tarp it until everything pretty much dies back, pull the tarp back, and we like to prep the beds, add a little bit of compost, rake them out. If it's really compacted for some reason, we might broad fork it, but normally we don't. And then we'll water it. This is all if we have time in a perfect world, but then we'd water it, tarp it, or maybe leave it open for a day or two for some things to germ, and then tarp it for another like 7-10 days, and then take it off and plant. So we're trying to like prep the bed, get it all ready and water it, and then any weeds that are in there will germinate. And we can kill them with a tarp before we plant them. We do some flame weeding with like carrots and things like that, but not too much anymore. The weeds really, the first year they're awful, the second year they're not too bad, and the third year it's just been fairly clear sailing. There's certain times a year that we have weed issues with certain weeds, like every like August we get a lot of purslane and that other, I don't know the weed, but it's like kind of looks like purslane but not quite.
Prostrate amaranth?
Yeah, that sounds, it's definitely prostrate, I don't know.
It looks a little like amaranth, but it lies down on the ground and spreads out.
Okay, yeah, I think that's what it is. Yeah, so we do have a lot of that, just I think because we've probably never done that tarping and watering, stale seed bedding during that time of year. So it's like, you know, you have to do that during every period of the year to get rid of each set of weeds that germinates during that period of the year. And it just happens that we don't, I think usually we're probably just too busy to do the stale seed bedding around that time. But overall, yeah, it's really this whole market garden. There's one person who works full time and another person who works like 2 days a week on it. So it's, and the full-time person is working 40, 45 hours. They're not working 80 hours. So, you know, one, it's owner-operator could probably handle this amount for production. Then, of course, you still have to sell the stuff and wash it. But
Did you talk at all about the work you're doing with NRCS? Like what kinds of projects you have with NRCS?
yeah, so yeah, we've definitely, NRCS has been great here. The 4 of these greenhouses were NRCS high tunnel grants that we got. We just finished the last one last fall, so that completed our project for them.
Size are those?
30 by 96. And yeah, we got 7 of them now, which feels like there's 2 heated ones. The ones that run north-south are heated so that we get more airflow running through them for our tomatoes. And then all the other ones are oriented east-west so that we get better light for winter growing. That's kind of our thoughts with the different orientations there. So yeah, so that was great. It took us a few years, I'll say, to get going with NRCS because our previous landlord had, he was on their bad list for clearing wetlands and things that he wasn't supposed to do. So it took me a couple of years to convince him that I was better steward of the land than our landlord. But then once they finally realized that, they started helping us out. And so we got those. For 2 or 3 years, they're paying us to do the cover crop. That was part of, yeah, what's that? Equip, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so Equip was giving us like a, it's not a huge amount, but it's still paid for seed, I think, and at least, you know, we're cover cropping anyway, so why not get paid for it? So that was the first project we did, and then now we're doing 2 kind of separate projects at the same time. One is irrigation to put a pump. We border the Taunton River down there, and so we're going to be pumping water out of there, digging an underwater frost-free line all the way up to here so that we can water our greenhouses and our market garden from the river, and then also like our sweet potatoes and all our drip stuff out in the field. We want to be able to water that as well from the river because we're on town water right now, so it's great because we don't have to worry about testing it for organic certification and things like that. We're not worried about E. coli because hopefully our Raynham tap water doesn't have E. coli. But our water bill is like $6,000 or $7,000 a year. So if we can pump out of the Taunton and there's no E. coli in there, then we'll be able to save a lot. Also, we've just reached a point where there's just not enough water to water everything. The pressure from the town is only enough to do overhead irrigation in 1 greenhouse at a time. So it's like all day long, you're like an hour and a half here, and then like, oh no, like, you know, timer goes off, I gotta like switch it from 1 to 2, and then like every hour or 2 hours your timer's going off and you gotta switch it to a different greenhouse. And then like the mornings before the greenhouse people get here, I'm like trying to water the market garden because there's not enough, you know, pressure to water that and this at the same time.
So concerned about the chlorine in the town water too in terms of soil microbiology, or is that not a concern?
That's definitely something that when I first started doing it, I was pretty worried about it, and we had some chlorine filters, but I never really noticed anything that made me be like, maybe that's chlorine. And so the drip, I will worry about a little bit more because it's right on the soil. There's not much chance for the chlorine to evaporate or volatilize. But in the market garden, we're doing overhead irrigation, so I feel like a lot of that is just volatilizing before it hits the ground. All the winter greens, we're doing overhead micro irrigation too, and it's really fine mist that's coming out. So I'm thinking a lot of it is just volatilizing before it ends up in there. but yeah, that's definitely something that's been on the back of my mind, and we're hoping then it won't be in the back of my mind anymore if we switch the ton, so that'll be great. And then the other prong, besides the irrigation project, is we're doing a grazing management program. Yeah, where we've been doing rotational grazing now for 5 years or so, and now we're gonna get paid to do the same thing we've been doing. And they'll pay for some fencing and also to reseed some pastures with some better crops and some better pasture crops. So yeah, definitely go check in with NRCS. There's a lot of great programs.
You can be. I think you're probably all in equip.
Yeah.
My guess.
Yeah, I know the first one was equip. I
Yeah.
can't remember. What the other one is.
There's AMA too.
Yeah, I think it's AMA.
Yeah,
The new one is
with
all AMA.
With irrigation is often AMA. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of different. If you've never worked with NRCS before, there's a lot of different programs, a lot of different acronyms, but it's definitely worth looking at. And as far as like soil health practices go, you're doing a little bit with like cover crops and things like that. It's often on a per acre basis. So for smaller operations, sometimes it's not that beneficial. But I think we're moving in that direction where there's going to be a lot more of that available for smaller farms, and soil health has really been on our radar a lot lately. And so I think in the coming years it's going to be more and more available for folks, and things like cover crops for smaller acreages and things like that. And there's programs like we have one called adaptive management, where if you're interested in doing like sort of an experiment on your land, basically, of like, in this area I'm going to do this kind of cover crop, in this area I'm going to do this kind of cover crop, and I want to see how it works out. So that's another way that people can work through NRCS and kind of try out some new things and get some funding for it. We don't fund equipment, so that's where like MDAR is a great one for that. Yeah. Ours are mostly like either management practices or things like improving irrigation or improving like manure storage facilities and things like that. So there's definitely a lot with NRCS. If you haven't ever worked with them, reach out to them.
Yeah, definitely a great resource. There's like a little more paperwork involved than, it's the federal government, obviously. There's always lots of paperwork, so it's a little slower moving sometimes, but it's definitely worth, the time. And so don't want anyone to get frustrated if it takes a little while to get the ball rolling, but it definitely, and there's some really good folks down there. So. Yeah, we've been working with Joao too and he's actually, I didn't realize this, but he's funded by AFT, right? So it's great that there's more, because I think there's like a bottleneck in the planning of it to come together with these plans. So AFT's been helping out to get that, just clear up that bottleneck and make more farms available to get funding.
Can I ask, earlier today you were talking about getting the weeds pushed down for sort of making these transitions in no-till.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about your process?
Yeah, so like for instance, when we're doing conventional tillage with, normal way of growing vegetables, or I don't want to say normal, but the way everyone else grows vegetables, we'd had a lot of weed issues. And so like the big thing was if we had a field that we'd grown vegetables in for a couple of years and the weeds started to build up, that was something that we wouldn't try any no-till thing in there. We'd go and cover crop it for 3 or 4 years first. So all these places that we've started these no-till experiments were places where when we were farming conventional tillage, we were being really good about the weeds. So like maybe a section that we're growing carrots, and we like made sure to like keep all those weeds out. It was a nice weed-free carrot section, and maybe it was like something the year before that was also kind of weed-free. And then we go to cover crops for a couple of years to try to even further reduce that weed population. Thing about cover crops too to think about is that not only, you're not necessarily killing weeds because you're not getting too many weeds germinating because it's kind of outcompeting them, but all the soil biology, like earthworms are still living in that soil under the cover crop, and they're just eating soil all day long, and so they're probably going to be eating some of those weed seeds. And you don't even have to germinate them to reduce your weed seed bank, because I guess the point is having more soil biology will probably reduce your weed seed bank just in itself. And so then yeah, after that kind of couple years of cover crops, then we would try like a no-till thing. And if it didn't work out and we got all sorts of weeds, then we go back into cover crops for a couple of years before we tried it again. So, you know, you just don't want to try it on a field that's had weed issues in the last 2 or 3 years, or you're going to run into trouble, or it's going to be, you know, harder than it has to be.
For your cover cropping for 3 or 4 years, were you using perennial cover crop or were you using like different mixtures of animals?
So our typical cover crop strategy is we, usually the first thing we do is wheat, since we grow that for grain. And it also likes, it doesn't compete well in a no-till situation. So like after we harvest like sweet winter squash and it's a almost bare field, then we'll go in with wheat, and then we'll overseed clover into that the following spring, and then harvest the wheat that summer. And so like the first year it's an annual to try to kind of get things started, because also, you know, you plant a perennial, it takes a lot longer for it to get going. And then that annual acts as a nurse crop for the perennial to get going. So then the second year we can harvest a wheat crop, get some sort of cash off the acre, but also then that got your clover started. And so now we can go into like a year, 2 years of clover. That kind of starts to die back after a while. And so we could no-till drill in like another annual with a perennial at that point. It kind of depends on what we're going to be doing with that field, but we do like to, yeah, the clover really works well. And then if we're going to keep it, we found too, if we want to, some of the land we like to pasture with the animals. And so if we're going to turn it into nice pasture, we like to have at least 4 or 5 years where we're not going to plant a cash crop, because it takes, you know, the clover establishes a little faster than an annual cover crop, but still even slower is like the perennial grasses that are really good for your pasture, like the perennial rye, orchard grass, things like that kind of take 2 or 3 years to get a good stand. And so, you know, we would probably plant that at the same year we harvest the wheat, but then they wouldn't come into full production the second or third year. And then you'd want to graze it the third and fourth year, because you don't want to, you know, it takes 3 years to get a good pasture, and you don't want to just plow it right up. So it's kind of just like a progression, and it's also almost following like ecological succession, you know, where the first thing is a fast-growing annual, and then it's like a fast-growing perennial, and then it's a slow-growing perennial, and then we're kind of keeping that field used as pasture for as long as we can until we need it again for vegetables.
Do you consider incorporating animals into like grazing cover crops on this garden or anything like that? Have you thought about that idea?
I don't think so, just because we put too much effort into like making these exactly like the right size, and we're trying to wood chip the aisles and stuff, so I don't want to.
Yeah, you're making permanent beds.
Yeah, exactly. But so like this 1 acre we're planning on not putting any animals on, but we're hoping to kind of transfer that animal fertility onto here through like the green chop, because then you know they're putting manure in the pasture that's using to grow clover and grass, and then we're going to harvest that clover and grass and spread it onto here as mulch, and hopefully kind of try to get that animal fertility onto here without having to actually have them here and destroying our nice tidy area.
Can you talk a little bit about your management in your high tunnels? You said that's pretty similar to what you're doing out here.
Yeah, we do the same cropping. So winter greens over the winter, and then tarping in between. So once we finish harvesting the greens, you know, we try to get 2 or 3 cuts over the winter. But then once we're done with it, just tarp it for, I mean, during the winter sometimes it's like 2 months. If you tarp it in February, it's not going to be broken down enough until April or so. But things you tarp in May might only take 2 weeks to be able to turn it over into something else. So yeah, it's basically the same thing. We have the same size beds where we're just trying to, or even some things like tomatoes, once we finish, we wouldn't even bother tarping it. We're just going to rip out all the tomatoes by the roots, rake it out, spread a little compost, and then just direct seed some greens into that. We're really, one of the main focuses we're working towards now is reducing labor, because that's been a really struggle for us to get enough labor to manage all these things. And so we're really just trying to figure out the fastest, quickest way to turn it over. And we're finding that might mean growing less, having the greenhouses full of crops for less time during the year, having like a month off in the spring and a month off in the fall or whatever, where we're transitioning, whereas before we would try to like rip something out and plant something like the next week, where that's more efficient use of space, but it's taking more time. And so at this point we have more space than we do time, so we're trying to do more tarping, where we just let the tarp do the work for us. And as far as like rotating to different crops, we try to we do, like, each year we're trying to have a different summer crop. Like for instance, that one we have.
Do you want to walk over?
Yeah, we can walk through there. So this was ginger and turmeric. And as we harvest it, we use the tops as mulch, like in the aisles. So that's a lot of things we're doing too, like trying to use the the matter that we're not harvesting and using that as mulch in between. And then we'll basically just kind of rake. It'll be almost prepared. Once we pull the ginger out, we basically just have to rake it out a little bit, smooth it out, and then we seed it using a jang seeder. We have, we put 5 rows on like a 3-row unit. So, and then we do 4 passes in each bed. So we're doing 20 rows of greens. Like over here, this was, actually, yeah, we cover crop this one. So this, I could run through what we did this year for rotation. It worked really well. So this was the first year of the greenhouse. We built it in the spring, and then we had some time before we had to plant. We were planting a late succession of summer squash zucchini. So we finished it in, I think, April. We seeded oats and peas in there, and they grow up, pretty tall, about 2 feet worth of oats and peas. And then we tarped it for maybe 10 days, pulled the tarp off, and this, I believe, is maybe some of the last of what's left from the oats and peas. But it was a nice, covered the soil almost completely, and then we just came with the transplants, the summer squash zucchini, and just stuck them in right into the oats and peas. We're planting by hand in here, so it was pretty easy to do that. The oats and peas gave us, I'm sure we got some nitrogen and whatnot from it, from the roots breaking down. We got weed control from it being on top. And then by the time we were finished harvesting the summer squash zucchini, it had broken down for the most part. There's just, a little bit here and there. And then we just raked that into the aisle to kind of use as a mulch. And then I'm not sure, I think we probably spread a little bit more compost in here just because it's a new greenhouse and we haven't spread too much compost in here yet. And then just seeded it with the jang, and then, yeah, we'll get the spinach. So this will be our early winter spinach crop that we'll harvest probably until January, maybe February. And then once it starts to, we've done 2 or 3 cuttings off it and it starts to fade, we'll tarp this, and it'll be like our early spring, probably like radishes and salad mix and things like that we'll seed in March for harvesting like early May. And we tried to, so we do try to have like rotations where like that was all ginger and turmeric in the summer, and then this is going to be like all spinach during the winter, so that then the following year it'd be like all brassicas. So we kind of try to, as much as we can, keep it to like one type of crop, so it's easier to rotate, because things like spinach downy mildew we're a little worried about. We don't want to be like growing one bed of spinach in each greenhouse. We kind of try to stick it to there. And then the other thing we realized is that spinach, actually this was, I forget who, it was a conference, it was a NOFA conference, I forget what farm, I think it was Queen's Greens maybe, said that they don't need to use row cover for the spinach during the winter. That was one of the winter crops that doesn't require row cover. And so we have, since we try to keep all spinach in one greenhouse, so that's the greenhouse that we don't have to worry about row covering. So like the greenhouses where we have arugula and salad mix, we do have to put another layer of row cover inside it. And so that's, say, if you have 2 greenhouses full of spinach, that's 2 less greenhouses that we have to cover and uncover with row cover all winter long. So yeah, it does, you know, it's nice to have things grouped together by crop, but sometimes we also group things together by timing. So like, you know, like I said, in the spring, this would be radishes, salad mix, and maybe hawkeye. So that's kind of, those are grouped together just because those are all things that we want to seed in March to harvest in early May. So this was cilantro that we seeded into the side. We just had an extra side bed and we're trying to figure out what to do with it.
Are you using these like barriers to block off some of the rain or what is it?
Yeah, so the greenhouse skirts, I think, is the official, I don't know if that's official, but that's what I think most people call them, skirts. And so we started doing these for a couple reasons. So one is wind. So when you're winter growing, you have automatic roll-ups on here, so they'll roll up just like a few inches to like get just the right temperature to it. And so if they're rolling up off of here, then that cold air is coming right close to the plants and going right onto the plants. If it's like a little bit higher, then the cold air is, you know, it's mixing with a little warm air before it hits the plants right away. So when your greenhouse rolls up a little bit to get air in there, it doesn't like get this, you know, 30-degree air straight on your plants or something. So that's a little bit. The other thing is you'll get more of a seal. So as this rolls down, you know, we can roll it down to like 3 or 4 inches past, and you'll have this overlap of the plastic that seals it better. Whereas before, when you have it rolled down, you know, first of all, it has to be perfectly straight for it to sit right on there and form a seal, and there's always little gaps, and it kind of like blows out in the wind, and you know, so it just seals it better. Yeah, and then we like the crops that are really warm season, we have higher skirts for like the tomatoes, because those you really don't want like a cold blast of air coming into the, you know, when we first plant them and they're only a foot tall, before we had the skirts, you know, we'd roll up the side a little bit and to keep it cool enough, but then the wind would be coming in and blowing on the tomato plants and blowing them all over. So those, we put the skirts a little higher, so like a tomato plant like this, when you get a big gust of wind, it's not messing with it.
So it's just 2 pieces of plastic that are folded up and down on a wire with a lath, basically?
Yep, yeah, so we used fence tensioners on the side, and just, this is high tensile fencing that we went down. Every 4th bow, there's a tech screw in there to kind of keep it up and from sagging too much in between. And then, yeah, this is just like extra greenhouse plastic that we had when we covered it. We keep, you know, we try to save like the strips that are 3 feet wide or whatever, and just, yeah, just go up and over, and yeah, a little lath on that side.
Can I ask also, in terms of the rest you were talking about in the spring and your tunnels, do you sort of rotate which tunnels are resting in that chunk of time, or is it all of them you take a break? Or
so for now, up till now, we've pretty much been trying to like pack everything in as much as possible, just like one thing after another, maybe 3 weeks off to tarp it. But yeah, going forward, I think, I haven't worked out a schedule for that, but we'll probably be having more periods of rest in between where we might grow like a cover crop of buckwheat or something.
you still have crops available for sale during that time period that you're still growing? You're not like
Right, yes.
not everything.
Yeah, we're trying to like stagger everything so that, there's a consistent supply. Yeah.
And then for your tunnels that you do tomatoes in, you said that you orient them north-south, so do you like rotate other crops through them too, or is it all tomatoes all the time?
It's tomatoes. So basically, they're also the only ones with heat. So we'll do tomatoes, eggplant, basil, and sometimes we'll do our first bed of ginger and turmeric, so we can start harvesting a little bit early. And then we try to like rotate those by bed, you know. So like, it'll be these 2 beds are tomatoes. Oh, and cucumbers too. So it'll be like 2 beds of tomatoes, bed of cucumbers, a bed of ginger. Then the next year, the tomatoes will be where the other 2 are. So we're kind of just, those ones, we're just rotating the warm weather crops within the greenhouse. We definitely do plant the same, like there's beds where we plant tomatoes into it 2 or 3 years in a row. We graft all the tomatoes, so we haven't had any soil-borne tomato issues yet. But again, it's just a matter of time before it does become a problem. But yeah, it's a little tougher with that because tomatoes are the main thing we want to be growing in there. That's like the big seller, and so you're always trying to figure out what you can, rotate in with the tomatoes. But
How do your tomatoes look that good this late in the season?
Just a lot of work from Grace, our greenhouse manager, and also I think a big part, the no-till really helps too. I think you're getting a little more fungal action in there. We're always putting down, we side dress them with compost as well throughout the season. And the grafted tomatoes, they do really, really well.
You're putting a lot of mulch in there, right? Was it wood chips, or I forget what you're putting in there?
Yeah, wood chips, and so sometimes we put the chickens in the greenhouses, and so when we do that, we put leaves in to counteract all the chicken manure for the carbon, and that we had the most incredible crop of tomatoes and cucumbers the year after. I thought I put in what I thought was too much mulch. It was like a foot deep of leaves, and by the time the chickens went through it, it was almost all broken down, and we planted our tomatoes and cucumbers into there, and the cucumbers were absolutely ridiculous. Like, they grew up to the top, and then they started growing like all the way down the aisle and then back down, and like we were planning on taking it out and planting something else in like August, but these cucumbers we planted in March were like still producing and like still a bright green, and just it was crazy. So we also had a lot of fungus, like mushrooms growing up out of there. There's the dog vomit, the slime mold was on there, and so I was like, this is that. So that really, the soil loved that, having all that organic matter in there and the animals. So we're hoping to do that more too, the chickens in here, although that's technically right. The NRCS, we're not supposed to put chickens in any of the greenhouses that we got the funding for. I think it's 5 years.
I think that's that's probably the lifespan of them. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if it's not their housing, I mean, if they're just in there for,
yeah,
if it's a part of a rotation,
someone
think
said
it
from
would be an
NRCS, I
issue.
won't say names, but they're like, we're not going to come out here, and if they're in there for a month
Yeah.
in February, it's going to be fine.
I mean,
but
mostly that rule is people put them up and then they put all their equipment into these things, and that's to avoid that issue. But
yeah,
I wouldn't be too worried about it.
yeah, and also for the pest issues, we've had potato beetles build up. We were growing potatoes in here too, is kind of trying to get the rotation, and we've had potato beetles built up. So we're hoping to bring the chickens into those houses and try to clean, because we think they're overwintering like around the edges of the greenhouse. So the chickens will probably dig them right up. So this is the equipment. We have roller crimper here for pushing down cover crop and killing it, hopefully. This was also, we've gotten the acre grant twice. The first time we got the no-till drill and this roller crimper. And then the second time we got the mulch, the system we just looked at, the cut and carry mulch system, and this no-till attachment that goes on the water wheel transplanter.
What kind of no-till drill do you have? Great Plains or?
Yeah, we can look at that later. We got a Great Plains. Yeah, and so as you see, we got it too late to use it this year.
Is this where you have to have then the water wheel is on?
Yeah, so the water wheel hooks onto the back here. I still don't know how it works yet. I gotta look into it, but I think
The water wheel it's not 3-point hitch then, it's only pull type?
yeah. So the water wheel goes on 3-point, and then this is a pull type. So it's like a kind of weird setup. But then yes, the water wheel's back here, and you have these two wavy coulters with hydraulic down pressure, so you can use the tractor to push it down, and the weight of the water wheel helps push those down, and then it kind of just breaks up the soil and opens it up enough to stick your plants into. And there's a drip tape attachment too if you want to run drip tape with it. No-till, I think just no-till attachment, or water wheel no-till attachment. We got it through Brookdale Fruit Farm. Yeah, it's a Nolts thing. So yeah, you can probably get it straight through their catalog too. But honestly, it's usually cheaper with Brookdale because they get it shipped there anyway. I think it was 1,800.
I had 1,800 in my head, so I think.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was right around there. And then yeah, the acre grant is like a 75%. They pay 75%. Or actually, no, it's 80% now. So and we just had to pay 20%. So $360, which
That's amazing.
yeah, it's a deal. And
So you think that'll cut through your residue?
I hope
that you have?
so. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think it'll definitely the rolled stuff, but we're thinking like that green chop, probably only a couple inches. I think if you get too thick, it might not go through. You might have tried it.
Yeah. I've been using we have Great Plains no-till drill, and in the green chop stuff, what I found out is I had to set it shallower. If I tried going, if it went too deep, it would bulldoze in front. I had to have it so that, if this is ground level, that I was only in about that deep. If I got in too deep, it would start bulldozing in front of it. So it worked out with the Great Plains drill. I could just barely cut through the mulch, and I was laying the seed at the bottom of the mulch and right on top of the soil. I wasn't even into the soil, but it worked fine.
Came up pretty good.
Mulch.
Yeah.